The studio floor vibrated with anticipation as 300 smartphones lifted simultaneously, their screens glowing like digital fireflies in the darkened audience. Massive LED panels curved around the stage in waves of electric pink and gold, casting pulsing shadows across faces hungry for content. The Truth or Trend logo blazed overhead in holographic letters that seemed to breathe with each bass drop of the show's theme music, a fusion of ancient Greek lyres and modern synthesizers that somehow shouldn't have worked but absolutely did. Behind the cameras, production assistants scurried between towering light rigs and fog machines, their headsets crackling with last-minute adjustments. The smell of expensive makeup powder mixed with the artificial cherry scent pumped through the ventilation system, creating an atmosphere that screamed manufactured authenticity. Ring lights positioned every 10 feet ensured that even the bathroom selfies would be Instagram ready. The countdown timer descended from 10, each number accompanied by a coordinated audience chant that had been rehearsed during the pre-show warm-up. Camera operators glided on their tracks like sharks circling prey, while the director's voice echoed through the control room. Remember, we're making history here, people. Philosophy meets followers. Wisdom meets Wi-Fi. As the final countdown hit 0, the stage exploded in a shower of biodegradable glitter that caught the light like falling stars. The theme music swelled to a crescendo, and through the shimmer emerged Kim Kardashian, her entrance orchestrated with the precision of a military operation. She glided across the stage as if the very air bent to accommodate her movement, her custom Balenciaga gown shifting from deep purple to iridescent silver with each step, fiber optic threads woven into the fabric responding to her body heat. Her hair cascaded in perfect waves that defied both gravity and humidity, and her makeup had been applied with such skill that she seemed to glow from within, a living Instagram filter made flesh. Behind her, a small army moved in perfect synchronization. Her personal photographer captured every angle. Her social media manager live tweeted her outfit details, and her assistant held 3 different phones, each streaming to a different platform. The audience erupted as Kim raised one perfectly manicured hand, her diamond-encrusted nails catching the light like tiny suns. She moved to center stage with the confidence of someone who had turned watching her life into a billion-dollar industry. Her smile was radiant and calculated, practiced in front of 1,000 mirrors and 10,000 cameras. When she reached the host podium, a crystalline structure that seemed to emerge from the stage itself, she paused, letting the moment breathe, understanding instinctively that anticipation was currency in this economy of attention. "Tonight," Kim said, her voice carrying perfectly through the wireless microphone hidden in her jewelry, "we discover your best filter and your best self." Her delivery was flawless, each word landing with the weight of a promise and the lightness of a question. The audience response was immediate and thunderous. Phones tilted at every conceivable angle to capture her words, to be part of the moment, to prove they were there when philosophy got its first Hollywood makeover. The applause built on itself, each clap encouraging the next, until the very studio seemed to pulse with approval. But then something shifted in the atmosphere, subtle as a change in barometric pressure before a storm. The music softened to a gentle whisper, and the lights dimmed to a warm, golden hue that spoke of afternoon sunlight rather than studio electricity. The entrance to stage, left, the less glamorous entrance really, the one usually reserved for prop movers and backup dancers, opened with a whisper rather than a bang. Socrates emerged slowly, and the contrast was so stark it bordered on the surreal. Where Kim had glided, he walked. Where she had commanded attention, he simply appeared, as if he had been there all along, and the rest of the world was just catching up. His himation, the simple woolen cloak of ancient Athens, hung loosely around his shoulders, its cream-colored fabric worn soft by time and thought. His feet, visible in leather sandals that looked like they had walked the very streets where democracy was born, moved across the high-tech stage floor with steady purpose. He carried no entourage, no cameras, no devices. In his weathered hands, he held only a simple papyrus scroll, tied with a faded ribbon that might have once been red. His beard, streaked with silver, caught the light differently than Kim's carefully crafted glow. It seemed to absorb illumination rather than reflect it, as if wisdom itself had learned to hide in plain sight. The audience's reaction was a symphony of confusion. Phones continued to record, but hesitantly now, unsure what they were supposed to be capturing. Some continued cheering out of momentum, while others fell silent, studying this figure who seemed to exist outside the rules of their visual vocabulary. A few scattered voices called out questions. Who is that? Is this part of the bit? Why isn't he wearing makeup? Socrates approached the second podium, identical to Kim's, but somehow transformed by his presence into something more like a simple lectern, the kind where important but unfashionable truths might be shared. He set down his scroll with careful attention, smoothing its edges with fingers that had never known a manicure but had known the weight of real questions. When he looked up, his eyes swept the audience, not with the performer's need for validation, but with genuine curiosity. Here was a man who had spent his life asking questions in marketplaces and gymnasiums, who had been sentenced to death for the crime of making people think too deeply, now standing in a temple built for the worship of surfaces. The moment stretched, filled with possibility and uncertainty. Kim's team exchanged glances, their carefully orchestrated timeline suddenly improvising around this man who seemed to operate in a completely different temporal dimension. The director's voice crackled through earpieces. Stay with it, this is gold. An unexamined life, Socrates said, his voice carrying without amplification, each word falling like a stone into still water, is not worth broadcasting. The silence that followed was pregnant with meaning. Some audience members nodded, recognizing wisdom even when it arrived without a beat drop. Others looked puzzled, their minds working to decode language that prioritized truth over catchiness. A few laughed, thinking they had missed the punchline. Kim's professional smile never wavered, but something flickered behind her eyes. Perhaps recognition, perhaps respect, perhaps the dawning realization that she was standing next to someone who had been asking the questions she built her empire trying to avoid. She adjusted her posture slightly, and for just a moment, the manufactured perfection of her presentation allowed a crack of genuine curiosity to show through. The production team held its collective breath. This was not in the script, could not be focus grouped, defied every metric they used to measure success. Yet the cameras kept rolling, drawn to this collision of worlds like metal filings to a magnet. The stage lights found a balance between Kim's electric glamour and Socrates' warm authenticity, creating something entirely new, a space where influence and wisdom might actually meet, where the ancient questions might find modern voices, where the unexamined life might finally get the examination it deserved. In the audience, phones slowly lowered as people found themselves genuinely intrigued by something they couldn't quite categorize or commodify. This wasn't the show they had expected, but it was becoming something they needed. The two hosts stood at their podiums, separated by millennia and mindset, united by the strange alchemy of live television and the human hunger for meaning. Behind them, a screen descended from the ceiling, displaying a single word in elegant typography: contestants. Somewhere in the green screen confessional booth backstage, the first participant waited, unaware that they were about to become the subject of the most unusual experiment in reality television history, a show where getting real might actually mean getting real. The backstage area hummed with the familiar chaos of live television, but today the energy felt different, electric with possibility and tension. Monitors displaying audience engagement metrics lined the walls like digital windows into the collective soul of America, their numbers fluctuating with each breath of the show. Kim sat in her mobile command center, a luxury trailer retrofitted with ring lights, charging stations for 17 different devices, and a small refrigerator stocked exclusively with alkaline water and collagen supplements. Her fingers danced across a rose gold tablet, reviewing the day's sponsored content with the focused intensity of a general planning battle strategy. Product placement opportunities scrolled past in an endless stream: skincare serums, detox teas, waist trainers, meditation apps that required no actual meditation. She paused at a particularly lucrative moisturizer campaign, her eyes calculating the perfect moment to weave it into natural conversation. The brand had paid top dollar for what they called organic integration, the art of making advertisement feel like authentic recommendation. Her team had mapped out 17 different entry points into the skincare discussion, each one tested and optimized for maximum conversion rates. Meanwhile, 20 feet away but worlds apart, Socrates stood before a one-way mirror that looked into the contestant holding area. He held his ever-present scroll, but instead of reviewing talking points or sponsored messages, he was taking notes in the margins, observations about human behavior that couldn't be measured in engagement metrics or click-through rates. Through the glass, he watched a young woman named Madison applying makeup for the third time in an hour, each application more elaborate than the last. She adjusted her pose with each mirror check, practicing expressions that she hoped would translate well on camera. Her phone sat beside her, cycling through different filters as she tested which digital enhancement best complemented her physical efforts. Socrates wrote slowly, his stylus moving across papyrus with deliberate thought. She prepares multiple versions of herself, but which one does she consider real? Does she know? The production assistant knocked on Kim's trailer door with the ritualistic politeness of someone whose job depended on managing personalities. The first contestant interview was ready to begin, and the stage had been prepared according to the show's evolving format, a physical manifestation of the philosophical tension brewing beneath the surface. The interview space had been divided almost subconsciously by the production design team. Kim's side blazed with LED strips in candy colors, floating holographic product displays, and a backdrop that shifted through Instagram-worthy gradients. Her chair was upholstered in millennial pink velvet with built-in phone chargers and a discreet teleprompter displaying her talking points and product mentions. Socrates' side had been transformed into something resembling an ancient Greek symposium. Simple wooden furniture, warm, honey-colored lighting that seemed to emanate from within rather than being projected from without, and a backdrop of flowing white fabric that moved gently with the air circulation, creating shadows that danced like living thoughts. Madison entered the interview space, carrying the nervous energy of someone who had spent months preparing for this moment through YouTube tutorials and vision boards. She wore a carefully curated outfit that struck the precise balance between aspirational and relatable, expensive enough to suggest success, accessible enough to maintain connection with her followers. Kim's entrance was a masterclass in personal branding. She swept in carrying what appeared to be casual confidence, but was actually the result of years of media training and natural charisma refined to its purest essence. Her outfit changed color subtly in the studio lights, and her smile activated like a perfectly calibrated weapon of mass attraction. "Madison, honey, you look absolutely glowing," Kim began, her voice warm with practiced authenticity. "What's your secret? And please tell me you're using SPF." The conversation flowed like a well-choreographed dance. Madison spoke about her morning skincare routine with the enthusiasm of a religious convert, while Kim nodded along, occasionally holding up products that seemed to appear magically in her hands. The audience, both in studio and watching through their screens, leaned in, ready to be sold dreams disguised as advice. "This moisturizer," Kim said, her laugh bright as champagne bubbles. "Life-changing. Double asterisk." Madison's eyes lit up with the particular hunger of someone who believed that the right product might actually change her life. She reached for the jar with reverent fingers, already imagining the Instagram posts she would craft around this moment, the affiliate links she could include, the way this single recommendation might elevate her own influence. But then Socrates spoke, his voice cutting through the commercial energy like a tuning fork struck in a crowded room. "Is the change on your skin?" he asked quietly, his words carrying the weight of genuine curiosity. "Or in your soul?" The question hung in the air like incense, impossible to ignore and equally impossible to answer quickly. Madison's hand froze halfway to the moisturizer jar, her brain working to process this unexpected direction. The studio audience fell silent, unsure whether they were witnessing profundity or television malfunction. Kim's professional smile flickered for just a moment, not with annoyance, but with something that might have been respect. She had built an empire on understanding what people wanted to hear, but here was someone asking what they needed to hear instead. Madison looked between the two hosts, her influencer training battling with something deeper and more uncomfortable. I guess I want to feel worthy. Like, if I look good enough, maybe I'll feel good enough." The honesty in her voice surprised everyone, including herself. It was the kind of truth that rarely made it past the editing room, too raw for the carefully constructed narratives that usually defined reality television. Socrates leaned forward slightly, his attention focused on Madison with the intensity of someone who had spent his life listening for these moments of authentic self-reflection. "And from where does this feeling of unworthiness arise? Who first taught you that your value could be measured in appearance?" The production crew behind the cameras exchanged glances. This wasn't the content they had planned for, but the engagement metrics were climbing steadily. Comments were flooding in across all platforms, some confused, some inspired, some demanding more philosophy, others begging for the promised beauty tips. In the control room, the director faced an unprecedented dilemma. The show was trending on 3 different platforms simultaneously, but for completely different reasons. Kim's beauty segment had generated thousands of product inquiries and affiliate clicks. Socrates' questions had spawned philosophical discussions in comment sections that were typically reserved for flame wars and emoji reactions. The stage itself seemed to respond to this division. The technical crew, without explicit instruction, began adjusting the lighting and set pieces to emphasize the contrast. Kim's side grew brighter and more vibrant, while Socrates' area took on the warm, contemplative quality of a library at sunset. Madison sat between these two worlds, literally and figuratively. Part of her craved the simple transaction Kim offered. Buy this, look like that, feel better. But Socrates' questions had awakened something that refused to be soothed by surface solutions. I think, Madison said slowly, I think I've been trying to become someone else, instead of figuring out who I actually am. The admission hung in the studio air like a small miracle. Kim felt something shift inside her chest, a recognition she hadn't expected, a mirror held up to her own carefully constructed existence. Later, during a commercial break, Kim found herself alone in her trailer, scrolling through social media responses to the show. The comments were split almost evenly between praise for her style expertise and fascination with Socrates' approach. But it was a particular video clip that made her pause. Someone had isolated Socrates' question about worthiness and soul-deep change, setting it against Madison's honest response. The clip had been viewed over 2 million times in less than an hour, with comments that used words Kim rarely saw in her usual engagement. Profound, life-changing, exactly what I needed to hear. She watched her own reaction in the background of the clip, the moment when her practiced smile had softened into something more genuine, more curious. For the first time in years, Kim found herself wondering what questions she might ask if she wasn't trying to sell anything. Her phone buzzed with notifications from brand partners, eager to capitalize on the show's viral momentum. But Kim set the device aside, her attention drawn instead to the monitor, showing Socrates in the next room, sitting quietly with his scroll, writing notes that would never become sponsored content, but might become something more valuable. Wisdom. The distance between their two approaches felt smaller than it had that morning, and infinitely more interesting. The studio had been stripped of everything that made it a studio. Gone were the LED walls that had pulsed with electric life, the holographic displays that had promised transformation through purchase, the ring lights that had turned every angle into a potential moment of viral perfection. What remained was something unprecedented in the history of reality television. Truth, unadorned and uncompromising. The space stretched before them like a blank canvas, its walls painted in the kind of white that absorbed rather than reflected. A white that seemed to breathe with possibility rather than glare with artificial brightness. The floor bore no marks from the dozens of cameras that had previously tracked across it, no scuff marks from the dance of production that had defined the show's earlier episodes. Even the air felt different, thinner somehow, as if the absence of manufactured drama had created room for something more essential to emerge. 3 months had passed since the show's premiere, and the world had changed in ways no one could have predicted. Philosophy departments across the country reported enrollment surges as students flocked to classes with names like digital ethics and the examined life in the age of Instagram. Meanwhile, beauty influencers were quoting Marcus Aurelius in their morning routine videos, and self-help gurus were incorporating Socratic questioning into their wellness programs. The cultural collision had created something entirely new. A generation that was equally comfortable discussing contouring techniques and contemplating the nature of authentic selfhood. Comment sections that had once been battlegrounds for product recommendations now hosted thoughtful debates about the relationship between appearance and identity. Kim entered the transformed space carrying none of her usual armor. Her hair fell naturally around her shoulders, unmarked by the careful architecture of professional styling. Her face, bare of makeup for the first time in recorded television history, showed the kind of beauty that existed independent of enhancement. The beauty of someone who had finally stopped performing long enough to remember who lived beneath the performance. She wore simple black clothing that served no purpose other than covering her body, carrying no message beyond the radical statement of choosing substance over spectacle. In her hands, she held a stack of cue cards that the production team had prepared, filled with carefully crafted questions designed to guide the final episode toward its intended conclusion. But as she looked down at them, the words seemed to belong to a language she was no longer interested in speaking. The cameras were rolling, she knew, but for the first time in her adult life, Kim found herself genuinely uncertain about what version of herself would emerge. The carefully constructed persona that had built an empire felt suddenly fragile, like a house of cards in a gentle breeze. She had spent years perfecting the art of being watched, but now she wondered, who was she when no one was looking? Or more precisely, who was she when everyone was looking, but she had finally stopped performing? The boundaries between Kim Kardashian the brand and Kim the human being had blurred so completely over the years that she sometimes forgot where one ended and the other began. Every public moment had been curated. Every private moment had been potential content. Every authentic feeling had been processed through the machinery of influence until it emerged as something more palatable, more marketable, more shareable. But here, in this white space that demanded nothing but truth, she felt something she hadn't experienced in years: the terrifying, exhilarating freedom of not knowing what to say next. Socrates sat in the background, almost invisible in his simplicity, his presence so understated that the cameras had to work to find him. He had changed least of all over the course of the show, remaining as steady and unchanging as a lighthouse while the cultural storm swirled around him. His only concession to the moment was a slight smile that suggested he had been waiting for this convergence of honesty and attention his entire philosophical life. The contestants, 5 individuals who had survived the season's journey from performance to authenticity, sat in a simple circle at the center of the space. No podiums, no elevated platforms, no hierarchy beyond the courage required to speak truth in front of millions of watching eyes. Madison, the young woman who had begun the season desperate for validation through appearance, now sat with the quiet confidence of someone who had learned to find worth in places that couldn't be photographed. Her transformation was visible not in her styling or presentation, but in the steadiness of her gaze, the way she occupied space without apology or enhancement. The rules for this final episode were as radical as the setting. Each contestant would speak one truth about themselves, unfiltered and unedited, without the safety net of products to promote or personas to maintain. No music would underscore their words, no graphics would emphasize their points, no editing would soften their rough edges. The audience would witness the rare spectacle of human beings speaking directly from their interior lives to the cameras that had been trained to capture only their surfaces. Kim looked down at her cue cards one final time, then set them aside with a gesture that felt like stepping off a cliff. The questions she had been prepared to ask suddenly seemed insignificant compared to the question the moment itself was asking. What remained when everything artificial was stripped away? She opened her mouth to speak, but found herself pausing, not from uncertainty, but from the strange sensation of words forming organically, rather than being retrieved from a script. "I've spent so long being watched," she said finally. that I forgot how to see. The admission hung in the air like morning mist, delicate and real. It was the kind of statement that would have been focus grouped and optimized in the old version of the show, but here it simply existed, imperfect and honest, and somehow more powerful for its lack of polish. One by one, the contestants shared their truths. Not the dramatic revelations that reality television typically demanded, but the quieter, more profound recognitions that came from sustained self-examination. They spoke of the exhaustion of constant performance, the loneliness of connection without authenticity, the relief of discovering that their worth existed independent of their ability to generate engagement. As the final contestant finished speaking, the studio fell into a silence that felt full rather than empty. It was the kind of quiet that emerged when performance ended and presence began, when the machinery of entertainment finally paused long enough for genuine human connection to occur. Socrates rose from his position in the background, moving with the deliberate grace of someone who understood that every gesture carried meaning. He approached Kim slowly, his weathered hands holding something that caught the studio's pure white light. Without speaking, he extended toward her a simple mirror, not the high-tech surface of a smartphone screen or the carefully lit vanity mirror of a makeup station, but an ancient piece of polished bronze that reflected honestly rather than flatteringly. The surface showed Kim's face without enhancement or interpretation, without the digital mediation that had become so habitual she had forgotten what unfiltered sight looked like. She took the mirror with hands that trembled slightly, not from nervousness, but from the weight of the moment. As she looked into its surface, she saw not Kim Kardashian, the brand or the icon or the influence, but simply a human being who had spent so long being seen that she had forgotten how to look. The reflection showed her face as it actually was, not perfect, not optimized, not curated for maximum impact, but real in a way that felt both terrifying and liberating. Lines were visible around her eyes, evidence of years of genuine laughter and worry that had somehow survived the constant smoothing of digital enhancement. Her skin bore the honest marks of time and experience, the beautiful imperfections that connected her to every other human being who had ever wondered if they were enough exactly as they were. When she looked up from the mirror, her eyes met Socrates's with a recognition that transcended their vast differences in time and culture. In that moment, she was not a celebrity looking at a philosopher, but one human being acknowledging another across the space where all performance ended and authentic connection began. The cameras continued to roll, but they seemed to fade into irrelevance, their presence becoming as natural and unobtrusive as breathing. The audience, both in the distant control room and in homes across the world, found themselves witnessing something unprecedented, a moment of genuine human recognition, broadcast not as entertainment, but as invitation. As the lights slowly dimmed, the white stage fading to black like a meditation on emptiness and possibility, the screen displayed the show's motto in simple, elegant text: "Know thy selfie." The words appeared without fanfare or emphasis, their meaning expanding in the darkness like ripples in still water. What had begun as a clever play on ancient wisdom had evolved into something approaching that wisdom itself, a recognition that the self-worth knowing existed not in the carefully constructed images we projected, but in the authentic being that lived beneath the projection. In the end, Kim realized it wasn't about the followers who had watched her journey from the outside. It was about Who had been following her from the inside all along? The authentic self that had patiently waited through years of performance for the moment when the show would finally end and the real life could begin. The screen went black, but the questions it had raised continued to glow in the darkness, illuminating possibilities that no filter could enhance and no amount of influence could manufacture. The radical beauty of truth, the unprecedented luxury of authenticity, and the revolutionary act of being exactly who you were meant to be.